edition of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. Today we have another example of what I call surgical royalty. Dr. Keith Lillemoe is currently the Gerald Austin Chair of Surgery and Surgeon-in-Chief at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. Prior to that, his career has been nothing short of stellar in terms of academic progression. He did all of his training in Hopkins in Baltimore, was on faculty there for a number of years, became chair of surgery in Indiana before taking his current position some 12 years ago in Boston. He's well known to many people around the world as an HPB surgeon par excellence, and of course currently serves as the editor-in-chief of the Annals of Surgery. What many people may not know on the other side of the coin is that he's a fanatical sports enthusiast, and we're certainly going to enjoy talking to him about that and what deluded beliefs he may have as a very keen Yankees fan. So without further ado, let's go ahead and enjoy chatting to Keith Lillemoe. I'm John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives. Excellent. Well, welcome, and thanks so much for joining this episode of Surgeons' Lives, which, as you already know, has that little strap line that says stuff that matters, which is not necessarily the number of papers you've written or the titles you have. So I'm delighted that you've joined. What I normally ask people to do is, and I'll ask you to do, is to start us off with a little life summary, starting with the words "I was born in," which doesn't mean, by the way, what year you were born in.
Okay. Well, that's the easy part. So I was born in Aberdeen, South Dakota, which is a rural area in the north central part of South Dakota. My father was a farmer, a small family farm, and my mother helped with the farm and raised me and my brother, and so we grew up. My first job, I think, where I ever received an actual paycheck was probably as a surgical intern, because everything else I did was sort of working on the farm or helping out on other people's farms for a short-term basis. So
Sure.
I grew up on a farm, went to a small high school, 37 in my graduating class. A school that size, you played football, you played basketball, you were on the track team, you're in the band, you were on the debate team, so you really participated in everything. So it was a good experience. Then after high school, I went to college at the University of South Dakota, which is in Vermillion, southeast portion of the state. I really wasn't totally sold I wanted to go into medicine, but I'd been influenced by the fact that I'd had a brother die of childhood leukemia back then, when it was a fatal disease. And I had seen the impact that physicians could have on families, and it was a good feeling. And so that sort of caught my interest. I was relatively good in science, had thought about being an engineer, but decided I didn't want to go to the engineering school. So I ended up going to college in pre-med, and ended up staying and going to the University of South Dakota School of Medicine, which when I started there was a 2-year medical school.
Right.
And when I finished my second year, I had the option I could stay. So they expanded to a 4-year school, but I chose to transfer and ended up transferring from South Dakota to Johns Hopkins, which was a fairly significant academic jump, but it was a good social jump from small town in South Dakota to the inner city of Baltimore.
And, as you say, I mean, sitting after your 2 years in South Dakota, you had to go either east or west. So, but you decided to go east. Was it a deliberate conversation or a strategy, or was it just serendipitous that you ended up on the East Coast? Because you that's been your life ever since, really.
So it's a long story, and it sort of shows kind of the story of our lives. At South Dakota, because they transferred students for so many years, they sort of had sort of pipelines that people had gone to, and so I was thinking I wanted to go to Baylor, so not east or west, but south, because that had taken a lot of the South Dakota students, and so my wife and I, when we got married after my first year of medical school, we took our honeymoon in all places of Houston, Texas. And we went down and spent a few days in Houston. Went to I think it was the Astros game by then, or maybe it was the Colt 45s. I don't remember. And kind of did a few vacation things in Houston, but mainly went there to talk to some people, look at the Baylor Medical School, and they discouraged me. They said, "Oh, it's a terrible place. They work everybody to death, et cetera, et cetera." So I sort of chose not to go there. And I think little did I know, because I'd never been associated with a surgical training program, that everybody worked hard in surgery.
Yeah.
So I was sort of in between options, and kind of out of the clear blue sky, I received an opportunity that I could apply to a position at Hopkins. Hopkins hadn't taken anybody from South Dakota for 8 years. They didn't take transfers very often. And so I applied and sent in my application. And the next thing I know, I was interviewing at Mayo Clinic. I did a regional interview, drove there in a blizzard in January from South Dakota to Rochester, and came home. And like 3 days later, they offered me a spot, sight unseen. So I accepted a third-year medical school spot at Hopkins without actually coming to Baltimore, without even ever being east of Chicago in my entire life. So I won't say it was formulaic, but just sort of things happened, and I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to apply and get a spot. So
it was fate.
I would say, though, that did sort of secure me at the East Coast. I've never really thought about leaving to go to the West Coast, but I did go back to the Midwest, as you know, for a few years in Indiana.
Yeah. So when you land in Baltimore, I mean, what was what is your burnt-in memory of the change? I mean, it must, as you say, culturally, in every respect, must have been a big shift for you. What do you remember as being the biggest challenge?
Well, I think again, the location of Hopkins is still in a relatively tough neighborhood, and so we lived in house staff housing right on the campus, and so it was adapting to the sort of the environment around us. But the biggest adjustment, I think, was I had never really been associated with a teaching hospital.
Yeah.
I'd never seen what surgical residents did or anything like that. My main mentor, and why I went into surgery once I started medicine, was a practicing general surgeon in this little town of Aberdeen, South Dakota, who took me under his wing and let me scrub with him on cases and the like. And so I kind of came there knowing I wanted to be a surgeon, and then sort of going from being right across the table for a general surgeon doing hernias and gallbladders and colon resections to being the medical student, the third or fourth person down the line. There's a lot of adapting that needed to take place, but I fell in love with the surgery department there. As I said, we lived in sort of house staff and medical student housing, so many of my friends became the surgical residents, and so I was attracted to the people, but I was also attracted to the academic culture for the first time. So I think that was, despite everything around in the community and the neighborhood and the city and all, we fell in love. I know when we first got there, we said, well, we'll be there 2 years and we'll come back and maybe train at Minnesota or at Mayo Clinic or someplace like that. And the next thing you knew, we were there 29 years. So we were in Baltimore for a long time. So.
And when you went there, who was the chair?
George Zeidema, who George just passed away a couple of years ago. John Cameron was a mid-level faculty member who was getting busy, just starting to do Whipples. And then when I was a fourth-year resident, George announced that he was leaving to go back to Michigan in a academic leadership position for the medical school. And they had a search. I hardly knew what was going on, but they ended up offering it to John when I was a chief resident. And I think the next was history for John. And he was committed to building a GI and a pancreas program, and he had sort of thought that pancreas would be a good thing to do, and so because of him and his interest in expanding GI, he recruited myself, Charlie Yo, and a group of people to follow: Mark Talamini, Richard Schulich, Mike Chody, ultimately Tim Pollock, Chris Wolfgang, and that pipeline still continues.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and most of that pipeline, of course, in the Hopkins tradition, was exported to do great things in academic leadership positions around the country, including you. But I'm guessing when you went to Indiana, obviously, given your choice, I mean, you've had a stellar career academically, so there's no regret in any of this, but would you have liked to have replaced John? Or, I mean, you, as I say, it's not as though you've done badly since then anyway, but would you have liked the opportunity, do you think?
So how search committees work. I was probably John's handpicked successor, which was the kiss of death.
Yeah, sure. Always is. Yeah.
And so, I'd sort of been groomed. I'd been the vice chair. I'd been the program director. But, I think, and I said this in my American Surgical Association presidential address, I told the story. I said, I think Hopkins was ready for a change and needed to go a different direction. And in the end, when I went to Indiana, it was a great opportunity for me to sort of build something on my own. I was able to recruit some good Hopkins people. We built a pancreas program that is and was almost as big as the Hopkins program, perhaps not quite as academically productive, but so it was a great experience for me. And and then ultimately, I think having been at Indiana prepared me for maybe a more challenging job here at the MGH. So, the world works in funny ways. You don't always get what you want, but sometimes not getting that and building on disappointment allows for bigger and better things. And so I think in the end, I wouldn't change anything about my career other than one thing is that, our family grew up there. We still have 2 kids who live in Baltimore. We still have 4 grandkids who live in Baltimore. And so, and I'm still, as you know, from the notes we exchanged, I'm still a Ravens season ticket holder. So a lot of those things might have been easier, but in the end, it's all worked out well. And I can't complain about how that search turned out. And I can't complain about how things have worked for me.
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, it's that you have one has a vision of an idealistic outcome, etc., and being closer to your kids, etc. We're now in Baltimore, but fate would probably dictate that if you'd stayed in Baltimore, your kids would have left, or whatever.
That's probably true.
Yeah. I mean, it just life doesn't work like that. So you said that MGH was clearly going to be another challenge and more challenging.
Never-ending challenge.
Yeah. So, when you were a kid and I was a kid, the chairs were still pretty powerful people, in terms of, I mean, they're not without power now, but it's a different type of power, if you like. I mean, it's now much more collaborative teamwork with, the system and all of that sort of stuff. What have you seen in your career has been the big changes?
Well, I think you nailed it. I think back in the 80s when I trained and started the faculty in the late 80s and 90s, the chair of surgery was, if not the most important or powerful person in the hospital. His or her voice, and back in those days, it was almost exclusively his voice, meant the most. It was something I think that probably had to change and has changed dramatically over the 30 or 40 years for a lot of reasons. The system and things like service lines and more efficiency of delivery of care, and really having power sit in like one or two senior leaders is probably not the roadway to success anymore. And so I think the time at Indiana was an interim period for that. I don't think I ever felt that I was totally the most important person in the system, but I certainly had a opportunity to have contributions as that program evolved from sort of a centralized departmental financial structure to more of a practice plan within the health system. I saw that happen, and frankly, when I came to the MGH, that had already come into play. So I think I've seen a lot of evolution, but I would never say that a chair of surgery is the position is still a great job. It comes with challenges, but it is not the all-powerful. I can't walk into anybody's office and slam my fist on the table and say, this is what's going to happen because this is what surgery needs to happen. You have to learn to cooperate and collaborate with all the players in the system.
Yeah. And, I mean, as you say, obviously you can't do that nowadays. And the reality is it wasn't massively successful when you could do that, because, having a conversation and debate about something is usually more effective in terms of delivering the correct strategy. I was going to ask you, and, I always have to be careful how I phrase this, but, you and I are, shall we say, in a similar phase of our age and life and career. And things change, over those decades, etc. And I was interested in your bio where it says, and I'll quote for you. It says, in recent years, his academic interests have included surgical education, patient safety, quality, healthcare disparities, surgical leadership, and well-being. Now, I'll put money on it that you would not have said that 25 years ago. You were at the forefront of, major HPB and cancer issues, et cetera, et cetera. Now, and I do think, and I'll put it to you that, some of those interests, by the way, didn't exist 25 years ago. But, how much of those interests have developed because they come with maturity, like a fine wine, and you realize that there are certain things more important than another, paper, et cetera, and how much is because society's changing? What do you think?
I think I have the best of both worlds because I still have an absolutely fabulous group of pancreatic surgeons that I work with. My senior partner in our group, Carlos Fernandez del Castillo, is a great leader. He's a great partner. He's academically driven from the education perspective for the residents. He's a tremendous teacher. And we've got some junior faculty that are aspiring to continue to publish along that line. So, my job is to contribute to some of the planning of the studies, contribute to some of the certainly contribute patients and participate as I can, sign patients up for various tissue banking and things along those lines. And then usually what will happen is as an abstract or a paper comes across my desk, I kind of get a little bit of a say into it. So I still have the opportunity and great satisfaction of being part of a team like that. And so I would say that would be tough to walk away with. But I think when I list those interests at the end of the bio that you quoted, it's what I feel that maybe it's the no hair, gray hair thing that, I can probably contribute a little bit more to understanding how we face the challenges of education. We face the challenges of quality and safety and, surgeon burnout because, that's a big part of my job right now. I'm not. It's not necessary that I do more Whipples than anybody. It's not necessary that I be first author on papers, but it is important that I lead by example and provide, maybe not directly provide, but advocate for the faculty to support their well-being, to advocate for quality and safety, and to advocate for education of our residents, diversity in our workforce. And yeah, maybe it's maturity, but I don't think I've lost my passion for the other, but I think I can make more contributions than probably understanding the newest molecular biology of pancreatic cancer.
So, and part of it also becomes as your position changes, you are the person to provide the leadership in that, as you have that opportunity. So, I've talked to a number of people in this podcast at different ages. And I talked recently. We haven't published it yet, but I've chatted to Justin Dimmick and Tim Pollock. Both of whom I would classify as sort of another generation of young, highly successful surgical academics, etc. So it's a little difficult it's not as relevant to us, but I chatted to Jeff Matthews at the beginning of all of this, and we were talking about retirement and operating and when you finish, and some places mandate retirement at 65, some have no rule whatsoever. A couple of Jeff is keen on the concept of cognitive checking. I think he said beyond the age of 60, etc. What are your thoughts about, doing those Whipples? Should you be doing a Whipples when you're 80, or do you want to be doing a Whipples when you're 80, or do you want to keep working, or what are your thoughts?
So, the only person I know who was doing Whipples in their 80s was John Cameron.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think Charlie Yo and I are sort of his senior most trainee who are still chairs and still doing those operations. And we were very close to residency. We were very close to faculty. We remain very close. And we both have said we're not going to be doing Whipples at age 80. So I think I'm not going to be quite as sophisticated as Jeff. I could never be as sophisticated as Jeff Matthews, but my biggest fear and concern is that I'd rather retire one Whipple too early than one Whipple too late. And I look very carefully at my complications. You can't do pancreatic surgery without having complications.
Sure.
You'll have readmissions. But the nice thing I have is, as I said, a great team. You know, we discuss all our cases preoperatively together. I said the hardest thing for me when I went to Indiana to be the chair was I didn't have Dr. Cameron down the hall to come in and take a peek into the OR to say, you know, should I do this or should I not? And, you know, I was fortunate. Henry Pitt joined us, and Tom Howard was there, and Mike House and Attila Nakib, and we all did that for everybody else. And I continue to learn from my junior partners, but I'm very cognizant of that, and I do feel getting, you know, approaching the R word. I do think as a surgeon, to be a chair, you have to be a surgeon. I don't think I want to be a chair who is non-operative. Now, I point out that I do pancreas resections, I do inguinal hernias, and I do lap choles. I don't do a lot in between other than the occasional bile duct repair that comes in, but I don't do colon surgery.
Sure.
I don't do minimally invasive foregut or whatever. So, and I like that diversity because it gives me a chance to operate with the chief residents. I still like to do intern inguinal hernias, and you know, the gallbladders can fall into, you know, the last couple months with the senior residents, with interns getting to do their first lap chole with me, sort of help with the chief resident, helping them. I sort of enjoy being able to contribute in all areas. So, but you know, choosing to do pancreatic surgery, I do have to be very cognizant of
Sure.
where I should set limits, and if I'm not, then I'm failing my patients, and I say to my partners all the time, you know, if you start seeing a slippage, I don't want anybody to not bring that to my attention.
So as you say, it's hard to be a chair if you're not a surgeon.
I could do hernias and lap choles probably.
Well, sure. But you could be a surgeon without being the chair. So that raises the other question. Are you a fan of, what's the word, term limits? You know, I was a chair in England for 15 years, and, you know, I think I did a pretty good job for 12 of them. And that's not to say, by the way, that the ones that I wasn't maybe at the top of my game were at the end. I mean, my point being that nobody is at the top of their game every year all the time. But I've always taken the belief that there's a baton in your office somewhere that at some point you need to hand it over to someone and say, okay, I'm going to still do my thing here and whatever my interests are. But from the leadership standpoint, it's time. Now, some people, as you know, I mean, I'm not exactly breaking any secrets here and revelations in surgery. Sometimes people deal with that differently, shall we say. Well, what's your thinking?
Well, you can't really see it with my head in the way, but I have this great picture on my wall of now about 97-year-old Paul Russell. We lost Jerry Austin at 92, and Andy Warshaw was in his 80s, or is in his 80s, and then there was me. So we have 4 MGH chairs still walking the halls on a fairly regular basis in some function. I've decided that I'm going to break that mold, and when I retire, I'm going to leave Boston. I'm going to leave the MGH. We have no kids here. We have no grandkids here. We have 8 grandkids, and certainly my wife is ready for me to retire at any time. And I think that's what our goal will be, is to be closer to the family and be able to spend time with them and maybe travel and do things, and just be there when somebody wants to go away for a weekend to a wedding or something, that we could be there to look after the kids. I think that's my goal. And if I can play a role in, you know, in remote mentoring or helping in some way, wherever whatever city I end up with, I might do that. But I have no desire to continue to operate, just to operate. I think I'll be ready to give up the operating before giving up the chair position. And in terms of timing, and again, this will probably be circulated amongst the intern applicants. I don't think my job is quite done here. There's a lot of transition going on here in Boston. The bringing together of the Brigham and the MGH as closer allies. I have a good relationship with Jerry Doherty. I think there's a lot of challenges of a new system, and I feel that I have a role to help get through that process, as well as help navigate some of the financial struggles that all of our institutions are in. But I think when that job is done, I think I'll be ready to move on, and so it's certainly not a desire to stay on forever. Somebody said at a meeting I was, when asked, "Are you in favor of term limits?" and the person said, "I absolutely am. And as soon as I retire, I want them to put those into place." So
exactly,
I'm more than happy to serve as long as my department thinks I'm serving them, as long as my bosses feel that I'm serving them. But if the day comes when either group feels I'm not doing a good job, I could walk away very, very easily.
I remarked to somebody recently, I went at one of the ASA meetings in the last few years, pre-COVID. There was a session on, is there life after surgery? And I remember thinking to myself, oh, I need to go and listen to this, etc. And I went and listened to several people. I know Julie Freischag was one, and Mike Zinner was another, and can't remember who the other two was. And I listened to these, and I suddenly realized, according to these people, there isn't a life after surgery, because none of them had done what you're proposing to do. They'd all taken new jobs in the medical space. None of them had decided to, climb Mount Kilimanjaro or sail the world or whatever. They were all still. Now you, on the other hand, have, this big sports fandom disease that has clearly afflicted you for many years, and are living in the middle of Boston, being a Yankees fan.
Right, there's my chair over my shoulder there, a Yankee Stadium chair sitting in the chair's office in the MGH. So I will say honestly, I have never in my career interviewed for any job that wasn't a chair of surgery job. I've never desired to be a dean, a president of a hospital, a leader of a health system. I am pleased and admire Craig Kent, Selwyn Vickers, Bob Higgins, people who've gone on and done that. And I'm so happy that they're doing that. And Julie Freischlag and Barbara Bass, I'm pleased that they're doing that. I really have always felt my love was for surgeons and for surgical trainees. I started as a program director, and it was being a program director that really drove me to want to be a chair, because of the opportunity to support younger people. Selwyn Vickers once said, when he was moved up from the chair at Minnesota to the dean at UAB, he said, when you're a chair, you feel like you're the king of the lions, and when you're a dean, you feel like you're the zookeeper.
Yeah.
And somehow I just feel I'm better suited to hang out with the lions, and I certainly appreciate all my colleagues in other areas, but I view my job is to advocate as hard as I can for the surgical interns and the surgical residents and the medical students as I do for the other specialties, and I think I'm better cut out for that. But so again, I as I said, if I can use my wisdom and experience to help in a department remotely without having to go in every day and punch a clock or worry about RVUs, I will do that. But I really think when I'm done as a chairman, I will be totally retired, and probably won't make Mount Kilimanjaro, but I may make a lot more football and basketball games.
So when you were a kid in high school in South Dakota, as you say, you took part in all the sports. What was your sport? Which was the one that you were good at?
So I'm a big guy. I wasn't that big then, but so I was probably the sport where I contributed most was I was a tight end for the football team, and I guess probably a power forward for the basketball team. I was never good enough to be all state or anything like that, but for the local team, I probably was. Those were the areas where I felt I could contribute the most. And then that was with the high school sports, and probably I played baseball longer than anything because I was a little bit younger when I went through. So I played 2 years of American Legion baseball after high school, and I really played on some very good teams because my little town didn't have enough people who played. So I played for a couple other teams that really were very good. Made a lot of friends, and that's how I met my wife. Actually, was playing on some of the other towns' teams. So it was probably baseball. I played the longest and continued to play even in when I went to as a resident. We would always have softball games and intramural basketball games at Hopkins. And I know this is supposed to be a little bit of fun. I'll tell you the story about why I got the job at the MGH. I was going to be one of the last candidates to interview. And about 2 weeks or 3 weeks before I was supposed to come in early September to interview for the job, we were playing in our faculty house staff softball game at Indiana, and I tore my Achilles running to first base. And so I had surgery. I was non-weight bearing, and I had this interview coming up at the MGH, and I knew that if I didn't show up, they were going to move ahead. So I was going to come, but I was totally unable to travel on my own. I was in a scooter, so I was non-weight bearing. So I brought my wife with me to, as much as anything, just to help slurp me around. And the night before the first day of the interviews, typically the chair of the search committee had dinner with the candidates. And his wife, it turned out, was the dean for faculty affairs at Harvard. So most of the candidates showed up for the job and were surprised not to see just the chair of the search committee, but his wife. And so when you were the last one in the list, you kind of knew she was going to be there. So I asked myself, which was the more inappropriate, to call up and say, can my wife join us for dinner, or to be in the midst of the dinner and say, oh yeah, my wife's up in the room having room service. So I called the chair of the search committee and I said, what should I do? And he said, oh, bring your wife. And it was the best search dinner I've ever had in my life, and I've hosted many of them. The conversations were great. It was friendly, and frankly, like many things in my wife, our lives, my wife showed better than I did and made an impression. And I think from that moment on, the wife of the head of the search committee said, you got to hire this guy Lillemoe because his wife's just the delight to hang out with. And so when I finally was offered the job, they didn't have my cell phone number. I was actually in Florida near you at the Southern Surgical. And so it turns out that the chair of the search committee's wife had my wife's number. So my wife gets a phone call and says, hey, can Keith call, Dr. Slavin and Dr. Torchiana at the MGH? And so that's how I got it. So I attribute this job for sort of the maybe a little bit of a sympathy because I was in a boot and on a walker, and secondly because my wife made a good impression. So
a baseball injury. So if you weren't a surgeon, and that part, that life didn't exist, what do you think you would have been?
I think I've said this a lot of times. I think I would have liked to have been a college basketball coach.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Because it's about recruiting. It's a little bit about it's a lot about practice, training, and strategy. I could see myself. I would have loved to had that opportunity to hang around with young people and help develop their skill sets. That's kind of what I do now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I help patients along the way as I do it. So
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
I say basketball, maybe it could have been baseball, probably not football because that's too complex. But I would have said I could have been the head coach at North Carolina would have been a nice thing to do. So.
Yeah, it's interesting, as you and I mentioned before, my son is a football analyst, and he runs a podcast which people actually listen to as opposed to my podcast. I think he's the third most popular podcast in the country, and it's you and I can chat about surgery and various things like that and say something opinionated and nobody cares, really. He says something opinionated and he gets death threats. It's kind of really bizarre that people are I remember he said something about the Cowboys one day, and somebody sent him a tweet saying, "I hope you get ALS and die." I mean, really specific disease.
Well, with all the gambling going on now too, if he gets something out about an injury or something like that, and it doesn't play, he could have hitmen coming after him too. I don't know. So
yeah, it's but once you wonder, surgery is a very small world, and it's pretty much a safe zone. But it's when you're in the world of sports and major league sports, you're playing in a slightly different territory, in my experience. So, how would you like to be remembered, and how do you think you will be remembered?
I've been very lucky. Certainly did not come. I was the first member of my family to attend college. Now there are I have to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 physicians between my brother and I.
Yep.
He's got 2 daughters who are physicians and a wife who's a physician. I have a daughter who's a physician. So I would like to be known for someone who, accomplished a lot without a lot provided to me in advance.
Yeah.
But took advantage of a lot of great mentors along the way. I mentioned the general surgeon in Aberdeen.
Yeah.
I can talk about John Cameron, Bing Rickers, Jay Grossfeld, and certainly Jerry Austin here. And I guess I would like to be remembered as someone who gave as much to the people that I surrounded myself with and helped their careers as much as I received from the people who helped me. So if I could be remembered as somebody who's a mentor, somebody who was generous with their time, someone who volunteered for a lot of things, and just Annals of Surgery is a perfect example.
Yeah.
I tell this story. I said I was the first. There was a little bit of hard feelings between David Sabison and Johns Hopkins when Dr. Sabison wasn't Dr. Blaylock's successor, and one of the things that Frank Spencer told me when I didn't get the job at Hopkins, he said, "Keith, don't be like David. Don't be bitter."
Yeah. Yeah.
And so thanks to John Cameron, he went to David Sabison when he became the chair, and reached out and asked David to come to Johns Hopkins to be a visiting professor, and it sort of broke down those ties.
Yeah.
Medical students started to come interviewing, and I was the beneficiary of that new relationship because David asked me to write a review article for Annals of Surgery. And he said, Keith, I want you to write it. I don't want it to be John Cameron's paper. I want it for you. And I wrote that review article. And then the next thing I know, he called me up and asked me to be on the editorial board for Annals of Surgery. And then that led to more years on the editorial board and then associate editor under Bing. And I tell people, you never know when a little opportunity like that comes along to do something for someone who's influential, and they can turn around and help your career. And that's sort of my attitude. As you know, in Annals of Surgery, you're on the board. We have a generous editorial board. That's my way of rewarding people who do good reviews and contribute. And my only problem is I probably accumulate. I don't ever fire anybody from the board. I wait for people to retire, but maybe I need to make that decision too. That's another decision I'm going to make at some point, is how much longer do I want to do that job? That's the only job I've had in my entire life where there's no such thing as a vacation day.
Yeah.
If there's a day that goes by that I don't at least go to the website to make a decision or two, or assign a manuscript, it's few and far between. And a lot of Thanksgiving days are spent watching football and doing annals assignments. People say, why is this guy working on Thanksgiving? It's because, well, I'm watching sports and doing what I do. So
it's always interesting to me that, being an editor or a co-editor is just the same as being on the abstract selection committee. Nobody ever comments positively about the program or the papers. Their comments are always, who selected this crap, or who agreed to accept it, etc.
Yeah.
It's a thankless task. So outside of surgery, do you have a bucket list item?
Well, I think my wife and I do enjoy traveling. We're this summer we're doing a cruise. We're not big cruise people, but we're doing a cruise to Norway. We've not spent. I'm Norwegian. Lillemoe is Norwegian, and I've had one short stop in Stavanger and Bergen, but I haven't seen the rest of the country. So we're going to do a little bit of a Scandinavian cruise, and I think traveling a little bit, seeing parts of the world that I go to someplace without it being a surgical meeting would be fun for my wife. So I like to travel, but we have a second home down in Florida on the intercoastal just south of Boca that I think we'll spend time down there. But I really spending time with family and trying to maintain health and be able to really enjoy friends and family.
There's I don't know if you're a fan of Gary Larson and The Far Side, the cartoons, etc. He has a great cartoon of a coastline and the seaside and the mountains, and there's a series of, in the inlets, there's a series of parked cars and the inlets, and the caption for this is the Norwegian Fords. So if I was to offer a trade for you, which would be 2 weeks in Boca or the first pitch at Yankee Stadium, throwing out the first pitch.
The first pitch. If I had a little time to practice, because I've seen so many horrible pitches.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Including I watched the Yankee game last night, and the number one draft choice, the kid from France, 7'4", threw the ball, and it bounced about 6 feet in front of the plate and 8 feet wide. And I'm sure I would embarrass myself. So if you gave me 2 weeks to practice and let me throw out the first pitch at Yankee Stadium, that I would do that. I do remember, what when George Bush threw it out at the World Series in the year after 9/11, Derek Jeter stepped up to him and said something along the line is, "Go to the mound and throw a strike." And I'm not getting political here, but that was one of the best first pitches I've ever seen in my life. He winged it right in there. It was, and it was probably as strong a sign of supporting of America as you ever could see, is when the president fired a pitch from the mound to the catcher. It may not have been a called strike, but it was a sign that the U.S. was back. So
yeah, it never ceases to amaze me how people manage to be unable to throw a ball that distance, vaguely in the right direction. It's really quite bizarre.
I wouldn't want to do it to embarrass myself. So.
No, for sure. Well, Keith, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, but I'm sure it's going to be something that people want to listen to. I really appreciate you taking the time out of, I know you're all too busy day, to just talk about stuff that matters to us.
So I want to just explain. We have our resident graduation tonight. Otherwise, I probably would not have been in a tie. That's the one transition that I made from the time I was a third-year medical student until COVID. I wore a coat and tie, or a white coat and tie, every day for my entire career, except sometimes when I come in on weekends, I would wear a collared shirt. But since COVID, I've sort of said, certainly during those days, you spent most of your time on Zoom anyway. So I've sort of gone tieless, but with this graduation tonight, I had to put it on. So for all my friends who used to see me without a tie on, I didn't just dress up for you today, John.
Oh, I'm very disappointed, but I'm sure that with the benefit of Zoom, you're probably wearing golf shorts below it all.
Listen, I appreciate the opportunity. I'm honored that you'd think somebody would want to listen to me, and I'll get those pictures to you soon. Let me know when it does go out.
I will.
Maybe my daughter, who's a surgeon, will watch it. I don't think anybody else will.
For sure, I will. Don't you worry. Thanks, Keith. Bye-bye.
Have a good rest of your week.
You too.